This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show. Today on the James Altucher Show.
I've shown my calendar to a few people, and they go, wait, what is that? And I go, yeah, this is my calendar. Everything's broken down into 15-minute blocks, even if that block is like lunch, right? Or it says like read or go for a walk or something like that. And my calendar's completely broken up into those pieces. And so I end up with a lot more time, productive time, than everybody else does during the day because I don't have to go, what should I do now? My day is planned in advance. There might be flex time in there, but it'll say flex time, which means like go read something or go watch something or eat lunch with your wife, something like that. But I spend almost no time on switching costs. You know, I don't have to brainstorm what the next project is. I don't have to prioritize anything. I don't have to like react to people on my team making some sort of mistake. Like there's little bits of that, but it's built into the calendar, I should say.
That's such a good, like, I'll call it what it is, which is a life hack. And let me ask you a question. Let me ask you about that because maybe I'm going to start doing this now. I've avoided that for years. In fact, I've even written about don't have a to-do list because at any given moment, so I had several reasons why you shouldn't do to-do lists, which is A, they're sort of stressful because you don't always get the things done on your to-do list. And B, for me, at any given moment, I sort of know what I should do. I'll just do the thing of highest priority. And if some things I never do, it's because they were never the highest priority.
Right.
But I'm starting to think that your approach might be better because particularly during this weird quote-unquote downtime of this coronavirus lockdown, I'm actually getting overwhelmed with too much work. I never can call people back.
Yeah.
And but maybe I need to kind of put these things in the schedule. Like, okay, from 10 to 11, I call people back. From 8 to 9 a.m., I'm going to take a walk, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
You know, and I have more questions about your podcast growth.
Yeah. I
always wonder about this. How does growth happen in a business, in an application, in a podcast? What would you say you've used to go from like, 1 million to 6 million downloads a month? What were your growth techniques? Yeah, no, here's the thing about the internet is that zero software on the internet is rocket science. Like that's the whole reason the World Wide Web got popular is because it actually you don't have to be a sophisticated programmer to do sophisticated things here. So there's absolutely, I have never seen anything on the web that I consider even on a scale of 0 to 10 above a 5 in terms of difficulty. So all these features are easy to program and it's just a matter of doing it. Like if you think about it, this might be even interesting for recording, but if you think about it, look at all the best companies in the past 25 years. None of them are above the level of freshman computer science in terms of development. Like Twitter is trivial. Facebook is slightly, Facebook in the early versions was trivial, and now there's some stuff that's a tiny bit more sophisticated, but not much more. Speech recognition is maybe a little more complicated, but that's not a big thing on the web anyway, but that's a little more complicated. But I don't know, Uber, trivial. Airbnb, trivial. There's to business models, the complexity of business models has nothing to do with the complexity of the software, which should give encouragement to people who are not developers.
Dude, I got to we could start doing this kind of thing. In fact, we could start that way if you want. You want to start?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We're starting recording.
Okay, cool. So one thing that I think is kind of funny, and I know that everyone says, I thought of this before it became a thing, but it's a shame we didn't meet maybe when I lived in New York 10 plus years ago, because I remember trying to get taxis and I lived downtown. And so sometimes on some days, especially weekends, there just wouldn't be that many taxis, or you'd wait like 10 minutes. And then I lived on a street that never had traffic because I lived near the stock exchange. So I had to walk out, and I thought, you can get taxis to come to my house, but nobody's just going to drive by Wall and Broad because it's blocked off and you have to tell the police to move.
10 years ago, you lived on Wall and Broad?
Yeah.
10 years ago today, I lived on Wall and Broad.
No kidding.
Did you live on 15 Broad Street?
I lived at 15 Broad.
We lived in the same fucking building.
What?
Yeah, we had the bowling alley. It had
Yeah.
the squash court. It had the basketball court. It
Yeah.
had the ping pong table upstairs. Yeah, I played ping pong every single day there. Like I would day trade during the day, and when I would took breaks, I would play ping pong or go to the basketball court or
Yeah.
go to the bowling alley.
That's
You're
crazy.
kidding.
So we must have run into each other before we knew each other because I lived there in 2006, 2007, 2008 or something like that.
Oh wait, I lived there in 2009, 2010.
Oh, so you moved in right after I left. That's really funny. So we probably
Yeah,
That's
I
funny.
I lived in the Chelsea Hotel in 2000, roughly 2006 to 2009, and I was going out with somebody, and she visited. She was a therapist, but she herself was going to therapy also.
Well, that's good.
And she visited my place at the Chelsea Hotel, and her therapist told her, "Oh, you need to. This guy is no good for you. He's not putting down roots. He's living in a hotel." But I had lived in the Chelsea Hotel all through the 90s. So when I was getting a divorce, going back to the Chelsea was my roots. Like that was my home that I was returning to where I lived before I had been married. So I ended up moving literally within weeks to 15 Broad because it was an unbelievable building because no one wanted to live down there during the financial crisis. It was depressing. And so the rents were somewhat cheap. The amenities were amazing. All the buildings down there have amazing amenities to attract people because nobody was living there.
Right.
And it was the first time I'd ever rented an apartment on my own as an adult.
Yeah, that was probably my first, non-college kid place too. It's funny. It's funny that you said living in a hotel was going back to your roots. It reminds me of some like Batman Bane thing where it's like, oh, you think, you're unfamiliar with chaos. I was born in it. Like, oh, you think living in a hotel is weird. This is my normal. This is my baseline.
It's true. Like the Chelsea Hotel, which is kind of if people Google it, it was a very odd hotel in New York. It's been around since 1884, but it just was shut down in the past few years, unfortunately, to do the usual thing, build condos, which is going to turn out to be a big mistake for them. But it was a crazy place to live. It was the only building I'd ever lived in where I would even go on vacations with the other people who were in the building. Like there was a real culture around living in the hotel, but there was also the downsides too. Like, my daughters and I would go up and down the stairs to go to my place, and I'd have to kind of cover their eyes or make them walk carefully if there was like a condom on the staircase.
Oh,
like
yeah.
it was a seedy hotel as well. It was both culturally high end but seedy at the same time.
Isn't that like a lot of things in New York? Like, oh, I live in Alphabet City. Oh, how often do you get stabbed? Well, and then they paint like masterpieces or they're like working on something amazing. The reason we bring up this weird tangent is because I think, look, what if we met back then? Because I remember trying to get taxis down there and you couldn't, right? Because they blocked off the road after September 11th and no taxi would just drive by these police checkpoints because it's a pain in the butt. And so my friends and I were like, wouldn't it be cool if instead of calling the taxi company and explaining this every time, I could just drop a pin to the drivers? So we had drivers that we knew and we'd be like, here, can you come pick us up? And I thought, oh, well, he's in Brooklyn right now. He's not going to show up here to get us. So then we just had to call the taxi company or have the doorman do it. It was a huge pain. And so basically my friend had found this app called Taxi Magic and it was awful. I don't know if you remember it. It only worked in New York. It was terrible. It never got updated. Half the taxi drivers that you would call on it would be like, were confused because it got used so rarely, they wouldn't even notice they got like a ping on this map, and it would track the taxis. You could call it. It was just Uber. It was just a piss poor version of Uber. And I remember contacting the dev, and he said, yeah, I got to fix all this stuff. The problem is I don't know how to fix most of the stuff because I'm only sort of learning how to program. I just came up with this idea. And it was really interesting because then he sold it to somebody else, I want to say, and that guy wasn't a dev but fixed all the business issues they had with it and then just never updated the dang app. So they had all these problems, and I thought, going back to what you were just saying, if you had one decent dev that was even part-time working on this, we would have had Uber years and years and years. It would have just been for taxis, most likely, so it might not have taken off. And, Uber is a confluence of a lot of things, such as everyone having a smartphone, etc. But there was a time, and I'm sure you remember this too, where Uber was only in big cities and it was only for black cars and it was really expensive. And it was pretty much like lawyers and investment bankers used it, and that was it.
Well, it's interesting though, because the limitations of starting a business are never the software development or unless you're I'm talking specifically about like internet or mobile based companies.
Yeah.
The limitations are never software. They're never the technology. Maybe it's things like, oh, our mobile apps, it's our smartphones popular, but now, that was a one-time thing that around 2010 to 2012, smartphones basically enveloped the earth. They started out around the iPhone with around 2007, and then boom, within 5 years, everybody had one. But nothing else is sophisticated. Like take Google as an example. So I remember one time in 1993 or 1994, I was addicted to playing chess on the internet. I would play literally 23 hours a day. Like I was unhappy at work. I was unhappy in my relationship at the time. And I was just playing online chess all day long. I would lock my office door and just play 23 hours a day. And I remember one time I'm walking outside my office. I was going to the bathroom in between 1-minute chess games. And I ran into this guy and I'm like, what are you doing here at like midnight, on a Tuesday? And he said, well, I'm trying to write this software that takes random web pages and figures out what they're about. I'm hoping to get some government funding. And the web was like brand new. There was maybe, MIT, Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, and then, the place in Switzerland where it was all developed. There was only 4 places with websites. And I was thinking to myself, man, this guy's a loser, like staying here all night just to hope to get government funding with this web thing, like trying to translate pages on this web. And his computer was named lycos.cs.cmu.edu. So he built this software. He called it Lycos. It became a search engine. We would all use it, actually. Like if I wanted to find web pages on chess, I'd log into his computer, type chess, and it would show me the 3 web pages at the time that were about chess. And Lycos became a $2 billion so CMU spun it out to CMGI, which was a big internet investor, and then CMGI took it public. My friend was worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and boom, it was the very first public search engine. And again, the technology was not hard. Here's what he did. He would snag a random page off the internet, and he would just look at like, the number of times the word appeared on that page. And the higher it appeared on the page, the better off it was. So it would rank higher.
Right.
And the only difference between that and Google, like the infrastructure was the same. So you had this, what's called a spider, crawled on from web page to web page to web page and would put it in the database and say, okay, this is about chess. This is about Bill Clinton. This is about blah, blah, blah. And the main difference between Google and that was the same infrastructure, but Google had a slightly different algorithm. Google would say, how many other pages that seem to be about chess would link to this page that seems to be about chess. So chess is mentioned, but then it would rank it according to how many other pages that seem to be about chess would link to it. And then that's how it would rank it. And Google themselves, Larry Page, people always say, oh, Larry Page invented the algorithm. No, some other guy invented that algorithm and got the patent. Google took the patent from him and improved it. That guy who invented the patent, he was working for a mainstream media company. He wanted to do his own search engine, and they're like, nah, it has nothing to do with our business. So he moved to China. He quit that company. He moved to China and created Baidu, which became the largest search engine in China. So the same algorithm spun off Google and Baidu because it wasn't that sophisticated. It was easy to do. And then the media company that rejected that guy, I think his name is, I forget his name. His last name is Lee, I think, L-I. But then the mainstream media company that rejected doing the search engine that could have been Google or Baidu was the Wall Street Journal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, but again, it just underlines the fact that like that algorithm takes about, again, a good programmer 1 day to implement. And all the other infrastructure, like a web spider, the infrastructure for a search engine, all of that was public domain. So that was like for free.
So I remember those days, those early days, like Alta Vista, Lycos, I don't know, Dogpile was one of them. I don't know the difference, but I think one was, they were like, oh, we're faster. Oh, we have more stuff indexed because, we crawl every day. Whereas I think now, of course, Google's crawling like 1 billion pages a day or whatever the hell, is going on. But back then, I remember seeing notices like the site will slow down from 1 to 3 a.m. Eastern time because that's when we crawl the web. And it was like, holy moly, like they're just doing like a 2-hour quick update every day or every other day or every week or whatever. This is like the 90s.
Yeah, and bandwidth was slow then. Like we wouldn't be able to do a podcast then like this where we're looking at each other on video while talking and recording. But again, like for any idea you do, either the technology's easy or the technology will eventually get there because the internet, computers are still getting faster and the internet is still getting faster and technology around it, like, smartphones and smart devices are getting more and more pervasive in society. So, the interesting thing, so I don't know if you've ever started a company where you had to develop software as a part of it, but like software programmers, like you mentioned how one company should just have a good, proficient software developer. So the way software developers work, I always think is it doesn't work like a bell curve, meaning if you and I were software developers, it's unlikely that either of us would be 10% better than the other. We'd either be kind of equal or one of us would be 10 times better.
Interesting. So it's like an exponential increase in skill.
Yeah, it's like a what's called a power law distribution, sort of like earthquakes. So earthquakes on a normal statistics, earthquakes should never happen. But on a power law, earthquakes are gonna sometimes happen. So basically, it's actually like podcasts. Like when I go over people's podcast numbers, it's always 10x. So somebody either has 100,000 downloads a month, give or take, 1 million downloads a month, give or take, 10 million downloads a month. So it's another one of those, depending on what tier you're in, you're not going to be 50%. You might be 50% more, but you're not going to be like, I don't know anybody with 2 million downloads a month instead of 1 million, but I know people who go from 1 million, million and a half to 10 million all of a sudden. When you make an improvement, it's hard to improve incrementally. You have to improve in order of magnitude.
That's true. I remember doing the Jordan Harbinger show and being like, yeah, we hit 1 million downloads a month. And then it was like 3 months later, we were at 2. And then 3 months later, we were at 4. I don't even think we were at 3 for like a sneeze, right? And then we just went up to 4. And then you start to taper off somewhere around like 5 or 6 for reasons I don't even know, like reasons unknown, having to do with how things can scale to a certain level easily depending on how often you release podcasts or whatever. And then from there, you realize like, oh, the next shows that are bigger than mine are like Ben Shapiro, who has, probably like 10 or 20 million. And then above him is this sort of massive leap, Joe Rogan, which has just an absolute ton more. And you see guys like, Tim Ferriss, Ben Shapiro, whatever, are sort of at a similar level of downloads. But I don't know that many people that have like 1 million. I know tons of people that have 5, 6, and then a bunch of people at 10, 20. And then everybody else has like 200,000 or like 10,000.
Yeah, I know. I know a lot in the 10,000 level. I know a lot of people in the 100,000 level. And again, they might have 120,000, 150,000, maybe even 200. I know people at the 1 million level. And again, it could be 1 to 2 to 3. And then I remember one time I was talking to Stephen Dubner, who does the Freakonomics podcast, and he co-wrote the Freakonomics books with Stephen Levitt. And Stephen told me that I remember the time Freakonomics podcast was getting about 1 million downloads an episode.
Wow,
which was great. This was like 5-6 years ago, and I think they do one episode a week. And then he came out with one book. I think it was called Think Like a Freak. It was sort of the third Freakonomics book or the fourth Freakonomics book, and WNYC really promoted the book, and he went from 1 million downloads to about 10 to 15 million downloads. Or maybe I'm getting the numbers wrong. Maybe he went from 100,000 downloads of an episode to 1.5 million downloads an episode. And so that made him 6 million or more plus the backlog. So about 10 million per month. And so that was an example of an external event happened and he went up an order of magnitude. So I think I always wonder about this. How does growth happen in a business, in an application, in a podcast? And there's two ways. One is internal. So you make some format change and people like it. So now you just go from, hypothetically, let's just say 100,000 downloads an episode to 150,000 downloads an episode. But then there's the external hit like in the Freakonomics case, WNYC promoting a book. Or let's take Jordan Peterson's a great example. He became a national polarizing figure after some of his comments
Yeah.
about the regulating language on transgenders and so on. So he went from essentially nobody knew who he was to boom, selling 1 million copies of his book. And that was a little bit internal, but really external, the fact that he became scandalous. So I sort of think, that's sort of my model of growth. Like sometimes if you're growing any product or an application like a podcast, I guess there's 3 models. One is internal growth. What can I do to improve this? There's external growth. What can I do to get outside interest that will create a huge audience? And then there's a third, which is viral growth, which is what can I do to create sort of an exponential effect? Like 2 friends will tell 2 friends who tell 2 friends. And what would you say you've used to go from 1 million to 6 million downloads a month? What were your growth techniques?
It's funny because I thought, oh, okay, I've got to come up with some sort of like really clever marketing and things like that. And yes, I work on marketing sometimes, but since I'm not a marketer by trade, although any business owner has to kind of take up that mantle and do good things with marketing, or you're just delusional. I decided, okay, right now, until I figure that whole thing out, this is a year or 2 ago, I'm going to just focus on making really good content, because in many ways I consider that like the art, that's the craft of hosting a great interview or hosting a great podcast. So for the Jordan Harbinger show specifically, what I was doing was thinking, okay, value to the listener. What can I work on? So now every episode of my show has worksheets that I have created, not just show notes, but like worksheets, the takeaways from each guest that I put into a worksheet. And then I was asking my audience to share. So these all sound really basic, but what was happening was I was also outworking other people in terms of prep. So I will like read, I know you probably know this, but like a lot of hosts, they don't read the book. And journalists are the same way. They don't read the book of the person that they're interviewing. And the reason they don't is they don't have time, or they're doing like a 15-minute piece on somebody, so they're not going to be able to include that anyway. But with podcasting, we have the luxury of creating a conversation that's an hour, hour and a half if we want to. So I would do like 20 hours of prep. And I knew that I didn't have to be a particularly talented host or interviewer. I could do a better job as long as I outworked people. That was my strategy in law school, by the way. It was just like everybody's really smart. Everyone works a decent amount. But if I like triple the amount I'm willing to work, I can actually sort of get to the top few percent by outworking everybody. Because no matter how smart and talented you are, if you're mailing it in, you're not going to do as well as somebody who spent 10 hours doing something and you spend like 10 minutes. So,
right. And but by the way, I'm taking notes a little bit because I think that's a really important point, in that I think everybody who's successful probably goes through that. Like my first real job, I worked at HBO. And at first I was just sort of screwing up and I didn't really understand why. And I felt like, man, I feel like I'm smart and talented, but it's not really happening for me here. And then one simple adjustment, which is I just got to work an hour before everyone else. And that adds up incredibly quickly.
Oh, yeah.
Where suddenly I was creating so much more product than everyone else that it just became a natural that I catapulted above everyone else. And it's not, I don't mean this in a kind of Machiavellian way.
Yeah, sure.
It was just like a natural thing. And I think that's really important. Like, of course there's the concept that you have to work effectively also, but assuming everybody's working roughly effectively, everyone who's passionate about something is working roughly with the same amount of effectiveness, it really does boil down to, hey, I'm going to just do an hour more. And that compounds exponentially, actually. It doesn't compound linearly. It compounds exponentially.
That's an easy distinction to overlook, too. I think there's going to be a lot of people that might say, okay, so whatever, I don't know, it means it goes up higher than in a straight line. But the results that come from that are really extreme. So that, I think, is one reason that people can do an extra hour of work each day. It really does add up. I've shown my calendar to a few people, and they go, wait, what is that? And I go, yeah, this is my calendar. Everything's broken down into 15-minute blocks, even if that block is like lunch, right? Or it says like read or go for a walk or something like that. My calendar is completely broken up into those pieces. And so I end up with a lot more time, productive time, than everybody else does during the day because I don't have to go, what should I do now? My day is planned in advance. There might be flex time in there, but it'll say flex time, which means like go read something or go watch something or eat lunch with your wife, something like that. But I spend almost no time on switching costs. I don't have to brainstorm what the next project is. I don't have to prioritize anything. I don't have to like react to people on my team making some sort of mistake. Like there's little bits of that, but it's built into the calendar, I should say. So
That's such a good, like, I'll call it what it is, which is a life hack. And let me ask you a question. Let me ask you about that because maybe I'm going to start doing this now. I've avoided that for years. In fact, I've even written about don't have a to-do list because at any given moment, so I had several reasons why you shouldn't do to-do lists, which is A, they're sort of stressful because you don't always get the things done on your to-do list. And B, for me, at any given moment, I sort of know what I should do. I'll just do the thing of highest priority. And if some things I never do, it's because they were never the highest priority.
Right.
But I'm starting to think that your approach might be better because particularly during this weird quote unquote downtime of this coronavirus lockdown, I'm actually getting overwhelmed with too much work. I never can call people back.
Yeah.
And but maybe I need to kind of put these things in the schedule. Like, okay, from 10 to 11, I call people back. From 8 to 9 a.m., I'm going to take a walk, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. I'll tell you, it's a life-changing thing. For me, I had to do it because working from home when I started 13 years ago, so this whole, lockdown thing is like not that new for me. Obviously, there's a lot going on other than just having to stay home, but like working from home is not new for me. So what I did for years when I was first started podcasting and things like that is I would wake up kind of whenever because I was in my 20s, and then I'd be like, oh, I'm kind of hungry, make breakfast. I'd probably check my email or whatever, check social media. Then I'd be like, oh, I want to go to the gym. So then I'd go to the gym. Then I'd come home, shower up, eat lunch. Then I'd be like, oh, man, it's 2 p.m. I better like do some work. What should I do? What's the easiest thing that I can think of right now? I'll just check out more email or I'll like maybe return a phone call or, oh, look, my friend's calling me. I'll just pick that up and chat. And then it's like 5 o'clock and I go, let me just finish like one or two small things. I better get more done tomorrow because a lot's piling up. And that was like my entire life. And that was bad.
That is bad. And that's how I'm starting to feel now. And I guess I've been feeling that way for a year, but I've balanced it a little bit. Like, you're and I have more questions about your podcast growth.
Yeah.
But your kind of benefit or advantage is that you're pretty much 100% focused on podcasting. And whoever told you or whatever instinct you had, which is to just quadruple down on the podcast, really paid off for you. Whereas I feel like I do, not that I'm a dilettante, but I do too many things that I love doing. So I'm a writer and I write articles every day. I'm writing a book right now. I'm a podcaster. So, and I do the same thing as you. I prepare for at least, I don't know, about 20 hours. Realistically, I think I prepare about 8 to 10 hours per
That's plenty.
guest.
You're probably just a faster reader than me. Honestly, like at that level, you're probably just reading faster than me.
And just the point about reading the book, I agree. Most people don't read the book. And I think that's a kind of a shame because you and I both, we're not podcasting because this was the absolute best way for us to make money, like a shitload of money. Like that just is not, you shouldn't go into podcasting for the money unless you're going to be a Joe Rogan. I mean, you'll make money if you're in the top 2 tiers, but it's not like riches. Like if you're smart enough to do this well, you should, invest your money or do something else. But, so I'm not in it for just, well, I want to say I have a podcast. I really just want to learn things. I want to read a book. And if I like the book, I want to be able to call the author and say, hey, I have questions for you. Come on my podcast. And so that's been a really amazing thing just for my knowledge and growth in life is doing a podcast. But I also, so I write, I do this podcast, which takes its time. I do stand-up comedy, which, it seems like it only takes 15 minutes to go up on stage and tell jokes.
Yeah, right.
But you got to spend, it's at least 3 or 4 hours of prep before those 15 minutes. And then it's about 2 hours of wind down and kind of debriefing after those 15 minutes. And so it's like a 5-hour thing every evening that I do comedy. And so if you add, and then I also am a business guy. Like I have investments, I have businesses that I run. I'm involved in a lot of things. So it becomes overwhelming, and
Well,
I've had
that's a lot of
trouble
stuff.
balancing it.
That's a lot of stuff, man. I mean, I get it. I don't do that many things. Like maybe I just like need to get a life, but I can't really because I have an 8-month-old kid. So I've got that, and then I've got my show, and everyone's like, "Oh, you need to make a product and sell it, and you'll make more money." And I'm like, I can't do that because that's going to get distracting, and like I have to be really, really merciless about not doing too much because it is really easy to dive into too many things and then not prioritize important things. And I'm not saying you should cut out hobbies. So if people are listening and they're like, oh man, I do stand-up comedy and I do a podcast and I write, I should quit one of those things. You really don't have to do that. But I think a lot of people find that, I think when you really dig into your calendar, here's a good point. Most people can never actually diagnose the problem because they don't have a calendar. So there's no actual written record of where their time goes. So you can't do any sort of audit on your time and where you're spending it if you're not actually using the calendar because you just go, oh yeah, yesterday, like I spent some time with my kid and then I went to the gym and then I, had to go to the office for a while and then I did a podcast and then I did some stand-up. Like you just kind of have this sort of mental diary. But then if you were to put things in your calendar, and when I make people do this exercise, like when I'm teaching people productivity stuff or I'm doing consulting for some company, if I make people keep a calendar of everything social and business, we find the weirdest things. Like, let me think of an example here. One person realized that they were spending a ton of time on social media. No big surprise there, obviously. But it was like hours every day. We use the, what is it called? Like screen time app on their phone. And it was insane. It was like 10 hours, a week or something was spent on like Instagram. And then other people found really bizarro stuff like, oh yeah, when I take my kid to soccer games or whatever it was or whatever sport the kid was doing, they weren't even watching the sport. They were then going on social media and spending that time. So they were like disengaged while they thought they were spending time with their kid. And then they weren't even feeling like they were spending time relaxing, even though they considered social media their relaxing time, because they were doing that at the same time they knew they should have been doing something else. So it was like stressful and not productive at the same time, which is like the worst combination of anything you could possibly do to spend time, right? Like,
and if you think about it, that probably describes the behavior of the entire U.S. population.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it certainly was accurate for me up and until I figured out where my time was going. And then
I'm going to start doing that. Yeah, that's a great idea.
I highly recommend it. Even if you don't keep the calendar up forever, if you just do it for like a month, you'll find, oh, wait a second, all these things that I'm doing that I think I'm being productive, I'm really wasting a crap load of time. Or there's a ton of switching costs because they're like, what's the thing I have to do now? Oh, I got to call these people back. So you make all these phone calls, but nobody answers because you didn't schedule the call. So then you put the phone down and then you're like, oh, I guess I'll start writing now. But then your phone's ringing because everyone's calling you back. And then you're distracted. It takes you 4 hours to write an article instead of an hour and a half or 2 hours.
Well, and that's really important too, because if you're doing anything that requires mental, flexibility and focus, any distraction, well, like writing is a great example, but or reading, any distraction requires now 20 minutes to get back into the mode you were in before the distraction. So on average, as studies show. And it makes sense that you should schedule these things so you're not distracted. Like I'm in the final stages of writing a book, and I realized I've never been able to write a book in my life in New York City. And I've written 20 books, but I've always left the city to write the book. And now I'm in the city writing this book, and it's a different kind of experience because there's so many distractions. I have to navigate that. But I'm going back to the podcast growth. I do remember when you were, starting the Jordan Harbinger show, and you were very, I don't want to say aggressive about marketing because that doesn't describe you at all, but you were very forthcoming about asking for help.
Yeah, that was tough. It was kind of tough, actually.
Yeah, but you were very good at it, and it was very appropriate. And I'm sure just like I responded to your emails, I'm sure many people did and helped you out. And that probably, what would you say were your biggest contributors to growth? Because you did something amazing, which was you had a podcast and an audience, then you left that one and relaunched from scratch a new one. and built up even bigger. So, and that was just a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So what would you say were the biggest growth hacks there?
The biggest kind of growth, quote unquote, hacks are going to be calling on other people for help, because no matter how much you do on your own, it's really, really hard to replicate what the network effect of being able to ask for help. So I always say on the Jordan Harbinger show, I always say dig the well before you get thirsty, which is not something I made up. I think it's like a book title from 1997, Harvey McKay or one of those guys.
I'm gonna use it as your quote though.
That's fine.
Who gives a shit about Harvey?
Yeah, sorry, Harvey.
Wait, dig the well before you
get thirsty. And he probably took that from like the Old Testament or something. Who knows where that's from, right? Like, who knows? But what that means is you have to build relationships before you need them, even if it feels like you're starting from scratch. And a lot of people don't do that. I mean, how often have you gotten an email or had to unfortunately send an email? Well, let's start from getting the email because it's less shameful. But like, people will get right to you and they'll go, "Hey, James, long time no speak. Hope you're doing well. How are the kids? Are you still living in New York? By the way, I have a book coming out and I could really use your help." And you're like, this freaking piece of work is emailing me. Like, who is this guy again? Oh, right. Some guy that I talked to like 3 years ago and he was supposed to do me a favor and then he like flaked and I've never heard from him again. And now he's like asking me to get him on the show and market his book or something like that. Like, we've all had that and it's awkward. And it actually scares people away from digging the well before they get thirsty because they go, I don't want to sound like that guy or that girl. And the reason you won't sound like that guy or that girl is if you dig the well before you get thirsty. So you and I have been in touch for a long time and we're in touch pretty regularly. So last few months, pre-corona, which seems like forever ago now, you had launched Think Like a Billionaire, right? And you did that thing in San Francisco at Scribd. And you're like, "Hey, will you come out?" Or they asked me, "Hey, will you come out and do a show or an interview stage thing, whatever you want to call it, with James Altucher?" And I said, "Sure." And it wasn't like this weird ask because we probably talked 3-4 months prior at the longest before that. So it wasn't weird. But imagine coming out of the blue and being like, "Hey, will you do this?" And the person has to like try to remember where they know you from. It's weird. That won't happen though if you're in regular contact with people. So the trick is to be in regular contact with as many people as possible so that you can help them, not just so they can help you, but so you can help them. So me asking, I think like I made something like 140 phone calls the month I had to launch the Jordan Harbinger show. And it was easy enough to make those 140 phone calls because I emailed or texted those 140 people, and like 130 of those 140 people I'd probably talked to either via text, email, or phone in the past like 6 to 8 months.
So let me ask you about that because yes, I have a lot of people that I keep in touch with, and yes, by the way, I know what you mean. Like sometimes actually some of the most successful people I know are very transactional. Like they want something from you, they write that email, and then occasionally they return the favor.
Yeah.
Depending on where you are in the hierarchy. And somehow some of these people end up being the most successful, although that could just be some sort of selection bias. Like we don't know how many transactional people like that fell off the radar ultimately.
Yeah.
But how do you keep in touch with 140 people regularly? Like, do you have it in your schedule from 2 to 3 p.m.? I'm going to text 15 people.
Yeah. So I made a whole course about this, and I don't want to shamelessly plug anything. We can do it later, maybe.
No, let's shamelessly plug. I don't care.
Oh, okay. So I have a course called 6-Minute Networking, and it's because 5-Minute Networking was taken. And it's called 6-Minute Networking, and it's free. I don't sell it or anything. I give it away as like, that's, I guess, my like value add, whatever you want to call it. And it's at jordanharbinger.com/course. And again, there's no upsell. You don't have to like enter your credit card or any BS like that. But what it does is it teaches you a set of drills that can be done in a few minutes a day when normally you'd just be like dicking around on Instagram or social media. And some of the drills are like things like every day I get up in the morning and I obviously, like everyone else, I'll check my phone at some point. And around 10 a.m., that's not when I get up, by the way, just for the record. But around 10 a.m., I call it Connect 4, and I'll send 4 texts to people, but it's not just random people who pop into my head. Sure, one of those people might be that, but I open up my phone and I scroll all the way to the bottom of my text messages. That's where all those old, like, dead threads are, where it's like some guy you went out to lunch with in San Diego during a conference 2 years ago and you haven't talked since because you, like, forgot to save their number, but you texted them your name and they're like, hey, cool, nice to meet you. It's Jordan Harbinger here. So you can send that person a text, or it's just like an old friend that texted you a million years ago. You can send a text that says, like, hey, Jordan, I've done a really crappy job of keeping in touch. I noticed I haven't talked to you in like 2 years. Just wanted to see how you're doing. I just had an 8-month-old kid. This lockdown's driving me crazy. I don't know if I told you I got married in 2017 since we talked last in 2016. I can't remember if you met my wife, blah, 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 whatever. Tell me what's new with you. And then you say no rush on the reply. I know everyone's busy. And the reason you say no rush on the reply is because most of the time, if you hear from somebody and it's been like 2 years, they're going to think, is it going to be Herbalife or Scientology? Like, what does this person want? You know?
Right.
So I always want to destroy urgency. So people are trying to sell you something. They do that urgency crap, whether it's real or not, where they go, amazing opportunity. I've only got 3 spots left in my super cool mastermind thing that no one's actually signed up for, that's overpriced, that I've never run before. Like, they do the sales copy. But for this, you want to destroy urgency, saying like, hey, if you don't get a chance to reply, don't worry about it. Because people are trying to sell you something, they don't typically break urgency. It's bad sales techniques to do that. So actually, that'll increase your response rate. And so you break urgency, you use their name so they don't think it's a mass text. Like, you don't want to go like, hey, friend, it's been 3 years. What's going on? Here's my update. You want to use their name, and you want to sign it with your first and last name so you can avoid problems like the one I just had, where somebody said, hey, Jordan, it's Sam. How are you? And I said, hey, Sam, what's going on? And the whole time we're like chatting, I'm trying to figure out who the hell Sam was. And finally I said, well, man, good talking, but I got to admit, I can't remember where we met. And she goes, man, it's Samantha. And I was like, okay, I legit have no clue who you are. And she's like, oh, sorry, I'm the ad agent from, I don't know, like whatever company. And we met at FinCon in 2016. And I was like, cool, I got to admit, I have no clue who you were, and I still don't. And she's like laughing about it because she's a nice person. But you don't want that to happen, because it's not a good catch up if you have no clue who you're talking to.
That's so funny. And, it's funny because, again, and I find that everybody has a similar framework. They just might do it in different ways. So, for instance, one way I do what you do, like you said, you scroll to the bottom of your text messages, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes I'll go back on my Gmail 5 to 7 years, find an email that I never responded to, and respond as if I had just gotten the email. So there's kind of like an element of humor to it.
Yeah.
When they get the email. Like someone will ask me to lunch in 2012, and I never had responded. And then I'll hit reply and I'll say, okay, you around next Tuesday? How about this place? And usually people get a kick out of that, and it kind of covers over the fact that I never responded 8 years ago.
Right. They're like, I moved to Djibouti in 2015.
Right. And then your idea of not asking for anything, this sort of reverse sales technique, I do that as well. Like even if I'm like one networking technique I do is I'll give an idea. Like, let's say I'll write to somebody and I'll say, hey man, love your podcast. Here's 5 ideas that I would do if I were you. Hope all is well. No need to respond. Good luck.
Yeah.
And so it's very much like just giving, and there's no possibility that I come across as being salesy.
Yeah, that's great. And I think the key here is not necessarily the format, although you should always use your name and use their name so they don't think it's like a mass text and they can remember you. But the trick is doing it consistently and systemizing it. Because if you do that once and you do it like twice a month or something, it's okay, but it's better than nothing, but it's not great. If you do it every day at the same time and you do it with 1 to 4 people, and you systemize it at the same time, you'll do it every day. And it's always these compound effects. So it's like, look, if you text one person a day, because maybe you don't have a huge network or of older contacts, and you take weekends off, that's 5 people a week. That's 20 people a month. Let's say you have a 50% response rate, which is low, but like not totally unrealistic. Usually it's like 75%. But for the sake of math, let's say you get a 50% response rate. Now you're getting responses from 10 people. Most of them are just going to be like, hey, I got a dog. Here's a photo. By the way, I got to go to a meeting. Bye. And one or two of those people might be like, oh, okay, it's good to be in touch. I actually remember being kind of cool with you. Like, let's keep in better touch. What happens is over a period of months, you end up getting a lot of random opportunities. And I put random in invisible air quotes here because they're not that random. Real example, I'll text like 80 people a month. Again, it takes like 5 minutes a day, not even. And once or twice a month, I'll get some ping back from somebody, usually from the previous month or months, that will say, hey, Jordan, are you still doing speaking gigs? Or do you still do any kind of consulting? I've got my company wants to start a podcast. We don't know what to do. And I'll be like, yeah, I'm, for your company, Bausch and Lomb or whatever, it's going to be like $1,000 an hour, but I can get them set up with gear, get the right producer, help them design the show, whatever it is. That's not a real example of a company, but it's like the type of company. And they'll be like, great, here's a retainer for 20 hours. Let us know when we need to refill it. And I'm like, 20 hours? Like, we're probably not going to need that. But I just made like 20 grand consulting remotely for some big Fortune 500 company. That person would never have picked me for that job. They would have farmed it out to someone else. And usually I'll say, hey, how did this end up falling in my lap? And they'll say, well, after your text, a couple days later, I went into a meeting and the sales guys were saying podcasting is the latest thing. We need to find a podcaster. And I said, I know a guy because we just talked. And they said, reach out to him. And that's how you got the gig, or like, that's how you got the speaking engagement. And another real example from a few weeks ago is someone said, I'm walking, pre-COVID, I'm walking into our quarterly sales meeting and we're going to do an annual event. Do you do keynotes? Because you're top of mind for these people now. So if you can stay top of mind with 80 people a month, even if they're not really responding and they're not like, let's be best friends now, you're keeping top of mind with hundreds of people per year, just doing something that takes you like 2 to 4 minutes per day. And those opportunities start to come back to you. Even if 99 out of 100 people never responded to you or never got you any kind of opportunity, it's still worthwhile because the one that does come back could be like a job offer for you or a friend. You could meet someone that becomes a close friend of yours. You could meet a business partner. You can get a speaking gig that pays you $15,000, $20,000. Like, that's worth doing.
Jordan, this is so incredibly valuable. And the weird thing is, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate, everything you mentioned, I do or have done to some extent, but not systematically like you're describing.
Right.
Like, do you have a time? What's your time to find these? Or you said 10 a.m. is when you do this.
Yeah, I do it at 10 a.m. And the reason I picked that time is because if you send it early, like let's say I get up at 6:30. Well, if I'm texting people and they happen to be on the West Coast or Hawaii, they're going to be like, you POS. This is so annoying. It's like super early. And then if you're sending people to at a different time zone in New York at 10 a.m., it's like just after lunch for them or during lunch. But if they're in Hawaii, it's like 8 a.m. and they're not going to kill you. Or 7 a.m., they're not going to be super pissed off. And everybody on the West Coast is like awake, had their coffee, is probably not driving anymore at that time. So that's just kind of a generally good time. Like, look, do as you would do for your own time zone. If you live in Hong Kong, but most of your contacts are in New York because you're a banker, then take that into consideration. What you want to do is avoid catching people so early that they're annoyed or during a commute when they can't look at their phone, or they'll check their phone and be like, Jordan Harbinger, I know that a guy from somewhere. I'll look at it later. I'm driving. And then they just never reply. You want to catch them when they're like farting around at their lunch hour, looking at their phone and the text comes in. That's like the only time they can reply. Or they just got to the office and they're checking their phone because they were just in the car for an hour, hour and a half or whatever. You want to catch people when they might have a chance to respond. Because marketing companies who've done tests on this stuff, they say something like, it's like 99 point whatever percent of text messaging is opened and read within 10 minutes. And I wanted to find out when those texts were not opened and replied to. And it's when people are doing something where they can't actually get to their phone. And so that's usually just driving.
Yeah, that's very interesting because, so you're right. So I think actually the number is something about 80% of texts are opened. As opposed to email, I think something about 7% of emails are opened. And that includes all emails. So when you get like, junk mail that ends up in your inbox, 7% of the time people open emails. But when I even get junk texts, I probably open them.
Sure.
Because there's like a company right now in beta called Community, which is almost like a social network really based on SMS texting, just because, again, there's this knowledge that texts, at least right now, are opened up much more than any other form of communication. So it's a smart idea. And I just want to address the compounding nature of this. Again, it feels like linear. Like if you're texting 4 people a day, then and you do it, 250 days a year, so every day except weekends, then it's 1,000. Then it feels linear. It's 1,000 extra texts to people a year. But the way it actually works exponentially is, let's say I'm comparing myself to the general population. So every day, if I send these texts out, let's say I'm just texting, or let's say I'm just networking 1% more than all of my peers or competitors. So just 1% more per day than all of my competitors. After a year, it's not 365% more. It's because that 1% compounds, it's 3,800% more. So the effects of this are enormous, and people do not realize that anything you do consistently and systematically that kind of enhances your career and knowledge and network and so on has this 38x return per year, which you can't get 3,800% in any other investment of money or time.
No.
So it's incredibly valuable. And this is what else is in the 6-minute networking?
So I have a CRM that I use to keep in touch with people via email, and it reminds me how long it's been since I've talked to them, and it will remind me that, like, hey, you haven't emailed James Altucher in 90 days. And I can either do a drop-down selection where I'm like, oh, no, we just talked, we just did a podcast, or, oh, he just texted me. But it looks at your Gmail, and it says, these people that you've selected as important, because you can add people to what's called buckets. And it's like, remind me if I haven't emailed James Altucher in 90 days. Remind me if I haven't emailed my cousin Chris in 21 days, or however long I select.
Fuck him.
Yeah.
Email James back.
Email James back. Chris, sorry, buddy. But like, you can select what sort of buckets you want, and then every day it gives you a digest. I take mine every week, and I just batch it, and it's like an hour a week to catch up with dozens and dozens, if not 100+ people each week. And I send those people messages, and it can do it automated, but I don't like to do that. I just like to actually just type the email, because that auto-generated stuff is just kind of BS. But it was designed for real estate agents to sort of do lead gen and stuff like that. But I use it just as a personal CRM, and it keeps me in touch with every show guest that's ever been on the Jordan Harbinger show. It keeps me
so valuable.
It keeps me in touch with every publicist that pitches me stuff that doesn't just pitch me like garbage, like fake ass, like crystal healers or something. The good ones. And it keeps me in touch with like all of my old colleagues from my law firm when I worked on Wall Street. I'll hit them up, every 6 months. Keeps me in touch with people that have spoken at events where I've also spoken. So I never lose touch with those people because I'm consistently reaching out, and I'm like, hey, and people think, oh, I don't have anything to say to them. Trust me, if you think for like 2 seconds, you can say, even recently, my follow-ups have been, hey, David, been a long time since we spoke at such and such event last year at this time. Now we're not even allowed out of the house. Are you going stir crazy, or do you have inbox zero and you're feeling good about it? I know you have kids, because you can keep notes in the CRM. Like, are they driving you nuts? And then you'll get a response that's like, no, we're doing great. We actually left the country. We live in Canada, and we're in the middle of nowhere. We go fishing every day. It's awesome. And you're like, great. So you're like the only one keeping in touch with these people from that event. And that alone is just a numbers game. And if you're emailing, again, this doesn't take like 6 hours a week. It takes like an hour a week total to do everything.
And what's the CRM called?
It's called Contactually.
Oh yeah, I even have talked to that company before.
Yeah.
But I never followed up with them because I don't use Contactually probably.
Right.
And this is this is sort of one of those things where I look at this and like, oh yeah, I do this, except I don't. The key is this doing it consistently and systematically. And again, this is so valuable. And I can assure the listeners, like, I've seen you start from scratch on this, and I've wondered, man, how did he just totally explode in growth again?
Mm-hmm.
And this is really valuable. And now I'm feeling like a little tense because over the years, I feel like I've been pretty good at this, but not like just systematizing it a little bit more makes it like 1,000. Again, it's one of those things, you're probably 10 times better at it than me. just because you've systematized it, and it's amazing. Okay, what's another thing?
But by the way, I wanted to say with contactually, it's great, but it can be kind of pricey. So a lot of people might be like, "Whoa," because I think it's like $60 a month or $80 a month. So a lot of people will be like, "I can't do that. I'm a student, or I don't want to pay for that if I'm not sure I'm going to use it." Airtable, which is I'm not quite sure exactly what this is. It's some kind of crazy powerful software that's all in the cloud. I don't know how to describe it, but there's free tiers of Airtable, and there's a template on their website called Personal CRM. If you search for their templates, and you can just click Use Template, and you can use that as your CRM too. It's like the name of the person, you tag them as hiring manager or something like publicist. You can tell you could tell it who introduced you, when you last caught up, and where they live, stuff like that. And so Airtable can also do it. So that was I want to mention that so that people don't think that this is out of reach for them.
This is great. By the way, is it okay if I write about this and I'll totally attribute it to you?
Please do. Yeah, please do. And just throw like because the 6-minute networking stuff again is free, and it mentions all these options, how I use them, all the scripts, and it's just like 12 2-minute videos basically.
Well, the way I'll write about it is, or talk about it is, I'll always do it in the context of how did this guy Jordan Harbinger grow to even surpass where he was before. And it's this idea of digging the well before you're thirsty.
Yeah.
And he uses these networking. The most important thing is being able to ask others for help, because then that is a way of leveraging, your life experience, because you've met other people. But the only way you can leverage that is if you still have it's like memory in a brain. You only remember things if those neural connections have been watered over the years. Otherwise, you forget things.
Yeah.
So it's the same idea. You're kind of watering these connections that don't necessarily need to be watered, but by watering them, you're keeping the overall networking environment, or your overall brain, strong.
Yeah, people think that if they want to network, they have to go to these like really stupid time-wasting mixers all the time. They think that they have to be salesy. They think that they have to like be schmaltzy and schmoozy and throw business cards at people, and you don't. So the way that I create the network, one, never go to a mixer. You should never go to any event that's not curated. That's like a rule.
What do you mean by curated?
Curated is like, if it's like, hey, everybody come network, don't go to that. But if it's like, hey, we're only having business owners that have a average monthly recurring revenue of $100,000 or more, and only in the tech space for cloud-based software as a service businesses, we're doing a private happy hour at this bar in Manhattan, and it's the first Thursday of the month only. Please email me if you want to bring a friend who hasn't been before, and I'll make sure they're a good fit. That's like what the curator would say. Then you show up, and it's like only tech founders that are doing decently well in a business that's similar to yours. You don't show up and talk to somebody and they're like, yeah, I'm thinking about becoming a life coach. You don't have those people at that event wasting your time, or like somebody going there to be like, hey, I'm an investment manager that has 0 clients. Please give me your life savings and I'll invest it in expensive funds with high fees. Like, you don't have those people in there. So,
right. So, no, I totally agree with that. And so what else is in, what's another networking technique that you've used specifically that you feel contributed to the regrowth of your podcast?
Yeah. So not only should you only go to curated events, because that's where you meet more people that you can then keep in touch with. I am constantly introducing people to one another, and that has to be people that are inside your network already. Well, it doesn't have to be. It should be, and it's easier to do that. And a lot of people will say things like, well, I'm looking for people that can help me, and it's hard to find people that can help me. Stop worrying about who can actually help you, because if you worry about that, you're going to miss all these opportunities that I say they're over the horizon. So, like, you don't know that the person you met through this other person that you know already at frickin' some cafe during a lunch, you don't know that that person later on down the line is going to introduce you to the person you hire to do animation for your podcast, or to like do the audio engineering for your show. Like, you don't know that because you're not even thinking about starting a podcast yet. So that person couldn't have possibly pitched you for that. So you have to be really cautious about looking for the right person. And the analogy that I use is this. Let's say I walk into a party that's at James Altucher's house, and I really need a corporate lawyer who can handle a certain type of litigation. So I walk up and I talk to somebody, and they're like, yeah, I'm a graphic designer, and right now I mostly work for Intel. And I'm like, crap, I don't want to be in a conversation with this person because I just need a corporate lawyer. So I'm looking around. I'm not engaged with them. I talk to them politely for a few minutes, and then I excuse myself, and I go to talk to someone else, and I'm like, hey, what's going on? What do you do? And they're like, oh, I'm the hiring manager for this new startup that's like a Uber competitor. And you're like, crap, I'm looking for a corporate lawyer. I don't want to talk to this person. Rinse and repeat for 100 people. Maybe I don't even find the right person at that event, and I consider it all a big waste of time. That's a sucky way to go about creating relationships. However, if I go in there and I talk to anyone and everyone, and I'm only looking for opportunities, not just for myself, but for other people that I already know, other people in my network, then I talk to the hiring manager of this startup and I say, all right, so what kind of people are you looking to meet right now? And she said, we need people who are C-suite or some similar executives that have taken app-based tech companies from 10 million to 100 million and beyond, and especially if they've taken that company public. And I'm like, okay, do I know anyone like that? Let me think. And I sort of put a mental note there. And then the graphic designer who I met or whatever, who's mostly working for Intel, I say, so do you freelance? And they say, yes, I do. Okay, great. So you mostly do tech company type graphics? And he's like, well, I do motion graphics, like commercials for things like iPads or like Microsoft Surface devices that have Intel chips in them. And I say, oh, okay, so you could do like a startup's new tech gadget. And he's like, yeah, I love doing stuff like that. It sure beats showing off the same semiconductors every damn day, right? So now I can find people that they should meet, that they can help, and that can also hire them or help them do something else. Now I'm just connecting people that I've already met and that I just met who are inside my network to one another. And that makes it scalable. Because if I'm trying to help people and I'm a graphic designer, then what? I just have to make them free graphic design forever? That sucks, and it's not scalable for me, and it'll put me out of business. And that's why people are like, I need to look at what's in it for me, not just help people for free. I got bills to pay. That's fine. I understand that. But the way you do that is not by giving people free websites if you're a web designer. The way you help other people is you connect nodes in your network to one another. You don't want this hub and spoke crap where you're the middle of everything. You want an actual web.
Oh my God. Like, I've written chapters in my books about this. And again, you probably do it a little bit more systematically than I do. But my number one rule with networking is what I call permission networking. So let's say I know someone who would be perfect for you. Let's say you're looking for an audio engineer, and I know an audio engineer looking for a podcast to work on. Mm-hmm. I would first ask permission of both sides. Can I make this introduction? And only then I would introduce. Because a lot of times people send me an email, hey, James, I just want to introduce you to someone who'd be a great podcast guest. I'm moving myself to BCC. Good luck, guys.
Yeah.
And now it's like a homework assignment for me.
Right.
And no one asked me permission to have this homework assignment. And maybe that guy would be a good guest, maybe not. I don't know. But permission networking, I think, is a very important way for me to network, because then it shows that I'm really respectful of people's time and I'm providing value. But your final point there, the hub and spoke model, again, we're talking about exponential versus linear. So in the hub and spoke model, you have a personal network of, let's say, 100 people. And then if you meet someone at a party, now it's 101. And then you meet someone on the street, now it's 102. But when you start connecting the nodes of those 100 people, it's not 100. It's not the power of 100 people that you've networked with. It's the power of 10,000, because all the possible connections between 100 people is 10,000 connections. This is nodes connected in a graph. You'd have 10,000 lines instead of just 100 lines connecting just you to each person. So that's where the exponential power of, when you introduce two other people and you're not being transactional, you're not expecting anything to get out, you're not expecting to get anything out of this new introduction, then boom, that is so powerful. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's extremely powerful. I don't know how exactly the math works, but you're right. It's like there are people that I'll routinely get emails from, and this happens almost like every week now, where someone will say, hey, Jordan, I just want to say a quick thank you. me and so, and I don't even remember introducing them, but they'll be like, me and so, we just founded this company where we're doing these live events and we want to have you come speak and our budget is, X, and we want to sort of like pay for you to come and show up because you're partially responsible for the success of this because we never would have met without you. And at our event, I'll go there, speak, give an awesome, hopefully awesome, give a decent paid keynote, and then they'll be like, everyone subscribe to Jordan's podcast. And then like this room with 1,100 people in it at this event that I sort of set up by sending one email introduction, and they did all the rest of the work. Now I've got all these people talking about me and being super thankful. And then if I ever need help, which I did when I was launching the Jordan Harbinger show, reaching out to people like that and saying, hey, I've got this problem. Can you help me? Those people weren't just like, yeah, I'll tweet it. They were like, let me email our entire company list about your new show right now, because when we needed help, you hooked us up big time and it resulted in this big thing. The least we can do is make sure you don't like crash and burn with your new business. So let's do you like a really big solid favor like we would do for like a really close friend. And these are some of these people I've never actually even met in real life.
That is great. And I could see now the pieces are coming together on how you were able to come back so strongly and then surpass even where you were. Any other techniques? And you cover a lot in 6 minutes.
Yeah, there's a ton, man. I'm telling you, like a lot of what I've created for the 6-minute networking course and that I teach on the Jordan Harbinger show is everything. Well, it's stuff that I use, but it's also stuff I teach to special forces, military, Central Intelligence Agency, MI6 and MI5. I did like a thing for them, even though it's not like they're not telling you that that's what it is at the time, but it's like really obvious when you do that. They're using this. So a lot of people will say things like, oh, I'm already pretty good at networking. I'm like, okay, cool, but are you doing all this stuff systematically? Because if you're not, then you're leaving everything on the table. It's probably like those people who, I'm sure you get this, where people say, oh, I'm pretty good at, I don't know, investing. Oh, great. What's the last thing you invested in? Oh, well, I mostly just track the markets. I don't actually put any money in. I mean, you'd be like, you're not good at investing then. If you just think you're good at picking stocks, but you never put any money on them, you're not good at picking stocks. Why would you, you're just telling yourself that you knew that Uber was going to be successful. If you really believed it at the time, you would have put some money on it. What are you talking about?
Right. No, I think that's the what's called the Dunning-Kruger bias, where people always think they're better. Like it's like 9 out of 10 drivers think they're above average driver when that's impossible.
Yeah, it's impossible.
So I find that to be the case, but that's also the advantage, because you could say, okay, good for you, and then you have an edge over all of these people who already think they're good, and so they've capped out because they're not trying to get better. But okay, what's another 6-minute networking technique that you've used? I swear to God, I'm gonna use all of these in my own life.
Sure.
And again, to some extent, it's like you just pointed out. I'm like that guy who says, "Oh, I'm good at investing." To some extent, I do all these, but it's the systematically that makes it exponential, have an exponential impact on your life.
Exactly. Like I'll talk to people and I'll be like, "Are you trying it?" And they'll be like, "No, I'm naturally a really good networker." And I'm like, "Great." And then what's sort of like tragic is undoubtedly at some point within the next year or two, because I can see it's like a LinkedIn thread or something, I've had people tell me they're great at networking, and then like a month or two later, they're like, I got laid off. What should I do? And I'm like, reach out to your amazing network that you said you had. And they're like, the problem is it was only people in my office that I was really networked with, and it's not really a broad network. And, the whole industry is kind of suffering right now. And I'm like, so you only knew like people in your own company. That's not a great network. You're not a good networker. You're a guy who shows up to the office every day and talks to people. Like there's a huge difference. And it sucks to have to tell somebody to dig the well before you're thirsty, and then you get the email that says, I'm thirsty, now what? And it's like, start now. And they're like, yeah, but how do I accelerate it? And I'm like, you can't. The best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago. The second best time is right now. Hopefully you're not like broke and unemployed, because that's a bad place to come from. It's like looking for a job. The best time to look for a job is when you have a job. Because when you don't have a job, then you're starting to be desperate. You're applying for stuff you're not qualified for or that you don't really want. That's not going to make you happy. Not good. So one sort of, I guess you'd say like final technique that I do for 6-minute networking, and there's a bunch obviously, but one that's really obvious and easy for everyone to do and everyone has the tools already, is look at the calendar, which hopefully you've kept for a while. And if you don't have that, then create it and make a list of everybody that you've spent significant time with over the past 6 months. Although with COVID, it's a little different, but like even significant time chatting online or working with or something like that. And then see if you're happy with the influence that, say, those 10 to 15 people have on you. Because you'll talk to a lot of people and they'll go, oh, yeah, my roommate is kind of a downer. He just plays video games all day, smokes weed all day. He complains about his ex-girlfriend all day. That's not really somebody I want influencing me. But we don't think about it because we think, oh, that's just like John's attitude. It doesn't affect me. But we know that it does. There's science called network effects now where you've heard of this, right? Where like if you have a friend whose friend smokes and you've never met that person, you're like 2.5 whatever percent more likely to smoke yourself, or like 10%.
That makes sense because everyone always says, oh, there's that famous quote, I think from Jim Rohn, you're the average of the 5 people you spend time with. But if you think about it, those 5 people, they're the average of the 5 people they spend time with.
Yes.
So you're definitely going to be partly, you're going to be the average of the 25 people your 5 spend time with.
Right.
So it makes sense.
And you find with obesity research and stuff that like people who are obese are much more likely to have friends who are also obese. So think about that. So if you have a friend of a friend of a friend that's like really overweight, you have a higher likelihood of also eating poorly and doing things that keep you that way.
This is so important. And I've always been good. I'll tell you, I've been good at the 5-5. So the 5 people I spend time with, I try to make sure, they're the people I like the most. And I do this like every few months. I'll tweak like a bonsai tree who is in my circle. And and again, I do this permission networking, not as systematically as I would like. And I've even written about it in a systematic way, but I should do it more systematically. I also never go to a mixer, and part of that's because I'm antisocial. The CRM of email, I'm absolutely going to do that. It's so valuable. The texting 1 to 4 people a day, every day, I should do that. I have not done that. That's great. And figuring out the right time for me would probably be your 10 a.m. is my 1 p.m. Trying to think what else here. I think those are the main things. And it's just been also this concept of reverse sales I've always done, which is when I send a letter to somebody, I make sure it's the opposite of sales. Like yesterday, for instance, I pitched an idea of for a TV show to somebody, and I said, this would just be good for your company. You should do this with or without me. And this person, who's a billionaire founder of a very successful tech company, he wrote back instantly and said, no, this sounds great. Let's set up a call. So, if you give without and you make it very clear that you expect nothing and you're very honest and sincere about that, then that tends to work.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. It has to sort of be sincere. And you can be sincere and say, I'm trying to get my network going because I've been bad at it. Because a lot of people will email and they'll write in 6-minute networking and they'll say something like, oh, what do I tell people about why I'm reaching out? And I'm like, don't make up some weird thing. Say, hey, I realized I haven't really like kept in touch with a lot of people and I wanted to change that. So I wanted to reach out. No rush on the reply. I know this is totally random. And you'd be surprised at how many people go, that's a really good idea. I'm glad you wrote to me. It has been a while. I've mostly been sitting at home watching Netflix and blah, blah, blah. Great to hear from you. The problems arise when people say things like, hey, what's going on? Just reaching out because you popped into my head. And then people are like, why would I pop into their head? Oh, they're probably making a list of people they can sell their healing candles to. I'm not going to reply.
So let's say though, let's say you had on someone like, I don't know, Richard Branson on your podcast. And how do you, or let's say you had on some famous movie star, like, I don't know, let's say you had Tom Hanks on your podcast. Yeah. How would you go about keeping in touch with people who, let's say, are in I don't want to say higher tier because it's not that hierarchical, but basically they have many more demands on their time. Yeah. And in society's ranking system, it's harder to network with people who are, famous or, the absolute number one in their field. How do you overcome that hurdle?
Yeah, there's a couple of techniques that I use for this. So a lot of folks will be like, oh, well, like it's probably a bad example, but I had the late, great Kobe Bryant on the show, and I was like, I'm going to keep in touch with Kobe Bryant. But you don't do that by being like, yo, Kobe, shoot me your number, let's hang, right? That's unrealistic and doesn't make a lot of sense. But what you do is you find the person who has influence with that person. So you find their assistant and publicist who you spoke with and did all the logistics with, who are like, the COO of Granity Studios, which is his company. So I was keeping in touch with those folks on a regular basis. That's actually better. Like, if you want to get a hold of me, you can reach out to me and I'll probably answer at some point. But if you really want to get a hold of me and like get me to do something, you should get a hold of my wife, right? Like, she's really pulling the strings. And a lot of people who are busy, they have those people in their life. It's like their COO, their secretary, their assistant, their publicist, whoever it is that has influence with them. That's the person you actually want to keep in touch with. So I recommend people figuring out who those people are and then do that. The other thing you can do is a lot of people, and I taught a bunch of scientists this stuff before. What you should figure out is not only young scientists were asking me how they can get in touch with like really well-known, influential, I guess is the term, scientists. Like they feel like, oh, I can't just show up at some conference and talk to this Nobel Prize winning scientist. Like, that person's not going to pay attention to me. And I'm not going to be able to tell them something about science that they don't already know because they're like the leader in molecular biology. What am I going to tell them about my stupid PhD thing that he could like do in his sleep with his eyes closed? That's not going to work for me. So I say, oh, look at their social media and or find out what it is that they like personally. So if you try to reach out, I'll use myself as an example because I don't think I can speak about any Nobel laureates with any sort of degree of authority. Let's say you reach out to me and you say, hey, Jordan, here's this thing about podcasting. There's like a 90% chance I read that in Pod News this morning, or that I read about that somewhere else, or that, I've had people reach out and tell me some news about a company that I advise or something. And I'm like, thanks, but I'm on it and it's not really that impressive. And I don't really engage with it that much. Like, I appreciate the effort, but it's kind of like, okay, I got it. And I might even forget about it. But if somebody finds something about, let's say, North Korea that's interesting and they send it to me, knowing that that I ran tours to North Korea, that I've been there 4 times, I'm not paying attention to North Korea news like every hour of every day. Far from it. So if somebody sends me a weird sort of factoid about North Korea, I'll read it and I'll engage with it. And they have a good chance of getting through to me on a personal interest that I probably am not always up to speed on. So I gave that bit of advice to these young scientists, and there was one that gave a great example that I use to this day when I give talks about this. She found out that one of these scientists who was like a Nobel laureate, he loved squash, the game of squash, not like the vegetable, the game of squash. And she was going to this conference where he was going to be, and she's like, I'm going to be waiting in a line of like 80 people to talk to him for like 2 seconds and tell him how great he is. I said, don't do that. Reach out on LinkedIn or find his university email. Reach out, find a squash court near the event, book the squash court. Doesn't even matter if you use it. You probably don't even have to pay. You just, you pay when you get there. Let him know a few days early if you can't go. Ask him if he wants to get a game of squash in before his talk or after his talk, and say you've already got a court. And it was like New York City. You can't get a squash court in New York by just walking into Equinox and being like, hey, I want to play squash right now. Never going to happen. So she rented this court or reserved this court like 3 weeks or whatever, 3 months in advance. Asked him if he wanted to get a game in. He said, it's impossible to get a court. She said, no problem. I already have one. Who knows? Maybe it was 15 Broad where we used to live. Right. And they went and played squash. And he's like, great. And the whole time they're chatting about what she's doing, her research, his research. She didn't need to wait in line with 80 people. He knows her now. He's got her email. She emails him every few months, probably not about squash, but he knows who she is. She can reach him. He'll take her quote unquote call, even though the call is an email. She's just jumped the queue ahead of like hundreds of other people that want to talk about this guy or guy's research or talk to this guy. Now, who do you think in a few years or in a few months, if she says, hey, I heard about this opportunity in your lab, who's he going to pick? This random person who dropped an email into a pile of 85 other emails or 185 other emails? Or the woman that he played squash with that one day and has been talking to on and off for the last 2 years? Who's going to get that gig? Her.
It's that technique also is so valuable. And again, I feel like not only have I done this, but I've written about it, but probably not as systematically as you. So, for instance, this is 20 years ago or almost 20 years ago. I was raising money for a hedge fund that I was starting, and there was a guy I really admired who was well known, who I wanted to have as an investor in the hedge fund. So I read his PhD thesis from 1972, and I wrote him about my notes from the PhD thesis and made, and we had an active discussion via email. I never once asked him for money. Then he invited me to lunch. Then another day he invited me to dinner, and it was dinner with him and his wife. And then eventually he invested in my fund. So stuff like that works. It's really, really powerful, as opposed to me just saying, hey man, loved your book, or, thank God you're here, or whatever.
Yeah.
It works.
It does.
So I just want to mention, by the way, what did you think of this format for a podcast? So this is just for the listeners. So we had no plan really on what we were going to talk about, but I feel, Jordan, you and I have known each other now for 6 or 7 years. And we probably physically see each other maybe on average, probably every 2 years. Maybe sometimes it's been 3, maybe sometimes it's been 1. But most of the time we have a conversation is when it's recorded like this. And so I figured, you know what? I really just want to have a conversation with Jordan and ask him questions that are almost personal questions that I've always been meaning to ask him. Funny. But it just so happens that we always talk while we're being recorded.
Yeah, that's funny. You're right. I mean, I was at your house a few months ago. Well, actually, it's probably a long time ago now that I think about it. It's probably like several months ago now.
Yeah, it's probably like 6 months.
And I like this, but you have to be careful with this, because I think a lot of, like, you and I are fine because we're both professional broadcasters at some level and we have years of experience doing this. The problem is if you do this with somebody who's like a tech founder and they don't have a ton of media experience, they could come on and be completely nervous, unprepared, not able to articulate things, not able to sort of search their brain for the right kind of answer, or not able to explain something very clearly. And so you are kind of rolling the dice. But that's why having, let's say, like a celebrity on your podcast is almost always a good conversation, because if you get Howie Mandel on your show, you don't need to go, okay, I've got this plan. Howie Mandel is just going to be Howie Mandel, and you'll probably be fine as long as you don't blow it. And as long as you could sort of keep him corralled in like the right, like not just running around the office or whatever a lot of these comedians do. Like, as long as you use wireless mics, I guess, when you go with those guys. But like, you got to make sure that you have some idea of where it's going. But for two people that really understand the media landscape, how to teach people things, it's always a great format to have it open and not have a ton of pre-scripted questions. I think it's always really great to do that. I think that part's really easy.
Yeah, because you bring up a really great point. Like, a celebrity, quote unquote, like Howie Mandel, it's not so much because he's a celebrity that is the benefit to the podcast. It's the fact that he's put in his hours learning how to, keep an audience moving forward, not necessarily either entertained or informed. Like, he knows how to pace it. He knows how to pace it with in a podcast format or in any kind of broadcast format. So that's the skill he has. That Howie Mandel's no different than you in this sense. So what makes the good podcast is not necessarily like, oh, I've got this celebrity on, but the fact that he knows how to do a good broadcast. He knows how to go for an hour and keep people informed and on the edge of their seats and entertained. Because sometimes I find having someone who's just a celebrity on, those are some of my worst podcasts, because they actually are just too used to people just being fascinated by them. And they just sit back and enjoy the glory when they might not have that skill of broadcast. Howie Mandel's, a comedian. So comedians often have this skill too, thinking on their feet, making sure an audience of strangers are adequately entertained every 15 seconds and so on.
Yeah, you're 100% right. There's a lot of different, if you just have some sort of actor on, they could just be like, whoa, I have to do something now. You're supposed to just fawn around me and like ask for my autograph. Or they have like, a lot of celebrities, you're right, a lot of celebrities will have like a 15-minute, I can be really funny and entertaining and charming, or 5 minutes, like what they do at a restaurant when they get mobbed. But they can't necessarily, and not many have this problem, I would say, but there's definitely some celebrities that are going to be impossible to connect with over an hour to 90 minutes like we've been doing, because they never have to do that with people they don't know, ever.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, so I've been play. I mean, I always am going to have. I think it's good to have well-known people on because there's a reason why they're well-known and there's things to learn. But I've been slightly moving the format to more conversation-based with people I know will deliver value, like this one, or even more storytelling where there's me and a foil who could occasionally ask questions or bounce stuff off me, but really it's me telling stories based on my own experiences. So I'm like the guest and the interviewer of my own podcast because that's how I initially built an audience, was by writing my stories down. And I've never really done that on the podcast. So I've just been playing around with changing the format.
Yeah, I like it. I think I tend to over prepare, but I don't always stick to the format. And I think for anybody having a conversation or broadcasting a conversation, you should look to do that. Like you can have a plan. You could read someone's whole book, but if they start talking about something else and it's a better conversation, you got to just throw the plan out the window and not worry about it. I think in show business, they call it killing your darlings because like you're so psyched about doing this one scene, but then you start improvising and it's amazing. Like I think that happened with the Hangover movie. They wrote all this stuff and then they started just goofing around. And a lot of that stuff is what made it into the final product because it was just ridiculous. It was funny.
Well, that killing your darlings is a big quote in writing. So I have 5 kids, so they're constantly writing essays for either colleges or whatever.
I was going to say you're constantly killing them.
Yeah, basically, it's well, the thing is, when they write these essays, I'm telling them like, here's a beautiful sentence, but it doesn't belong. You're not really adding any. It's what I call placebic information. You're not really adding. If you take the sentence out, you've reduced the quality of the essay, not at all, which means you've improved it by reducing the number of words to get your point across. So killing your darlings is an incredibly important skill in writing. Like I always advise people, even if you know this rule, write your whole essay out and then immediately remove the first paragraph and the last paragraph, and you'll see that the essay is better. Even if you already know this rule while you're writing the essay, it just is magic how that works almost every time. But very few people listen to me because it's hard to kill your darlings.
Yes, it is hard, especially if you've worked really hard on something. And I think a lot of people, let's say they have some sort of scene that they wrote for a play and they're like, this is amazing. But you're right, it doesn't add to the narrative and they just keep doing it. The problem arises, I mean, that happens in business too. Like there's companies that come up with some sort of app or something and it looks beautiful and it's graphic designed really well. And the CEO, it was his idea and he hired his cousin to build the thing or his brother. And the company's like, this thing is not going to do anything for the bottom line of the company. And somebody somewhere has to make a tough decision and be like, this sucks. It's not going to happen. Happens with movies all the time. And it can happen in podcasting too. Like I find people that don't plan, they don't do a great job a lot of the time. People that overplan and stick to the plan mercilessly, they don't do a great job because you'll find, I heard this example a long time ago, so I can't remember what show it's from. I'll just say it doesn't even matter anyway. But there was a doctor on there and she was like a disease specialist or something. She had been adopted from, well, I'm ruining it here. Let me think of how to tell the story. So this infectious disease doctor comes on the show and they have all these questions about infectious disease and, how she got so good at early detection, whatever it was. And she starts the show and says something like, sorry, I'm a little late. My parents were having their such and such anniversary. And the person said, oh, my parents just had an anniversary. Let me show you this photograph. So she gets out the iPad and shows like a photograph. And she said, oh, your parents, turns out this infectious disease specialist, she was African-American, but her parents were white. And the host goes, oh. And she's like, oh, yeah, I'm adopted. I was adopted from Africa as a kid. And the host just goes into their pre-scripted questions. And I was like,
I know.
You do realize that the reason she's probably an infectious disease specialist is because she was adopted as a kid from a place where there's so much infectious disease, and it very likely influenced her entire career trajectory and her entire life, right? And the journalist who was doing the interview just totally didn't get it and started asking about like research grants, and the show was lame.
Yeah, no, I see that all the time. It's so interesting. So in any case, Jordan, this was so valuable. I want to do this. I want to do a podcast again with you at some point soon. I want to pitch you all these, or I want to tell you all these TV shows. I've been pitching other
Do
people
it.
and get your thoughts and insights onto them, because they always overlap with everything we're doing. I feel like podcast media, it's like one big overlap. So I'm gonna keep picking your brain. This is gonna be the picking your brain segment of my podcast.
I love it. I'd love to. Thank you very much. This is a fun opportunity. Good to catch up with you, and stay sanitized.
Yeah, same to you. Thanks, Jordan.